Well, third time's a charm. I'm gonna start one more time. So I have the privilege of directing the Religion and Public Life program at Rice University. And our vision, in short, is to use research on religion to build common ground for the common good. And we do this through doing high quality social science studies, curating social science research, and bringing research to constituents who can use it. We also want to try hard to learn from our constituents and then to train students and scholars, religious and nonprofit leaders, how to work together in common ground efforts, really for the good of our city, our nation, and our globe. Today, we're gathered for an online event around what I think is one of the most important issues really facing all of us today, around the issue of educational inequality. Our event title is How Religious Organizations Can Respond to Educational Inequality in a Time of COVID. COVID-19 has exposed and made greater existing inequalities. This has been especially true with relationship to economic differences and racial differences in the kind of education that students are getting during the pandemic and the long-term educational impact of the pandemic. As I talk with religious leaders and nonprofit leaders in Houston and nationally, I know we have some folks on the call today who are religious and nonprofit leaders. I know that many of you are struggling to care for the educational needs of your own children. But in the midst of this, you also want to contribute to helping children who are struggling even more right now to get the education that they deserve and need. It's my hope that you will listen carefully today and that you might take away one or two things that you might do differently to address educational inequality. We're going to hear from three different people today, and this is a kind of all-star panel, and I'm extremely grateful that these folks would join us. I know one or two of you have needed to set aside your other work in order to make time for this event in the middle of the day, and we at the Religion and Public Life program are extremely grateful for that gift. First, we'll hear from Esmeralda Sanchez Salazar. Esmeralda is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Sociology at Rice University. She's also a graduate student fellow with the Religion and Public Life program, and Esmeralda works with the Houston Education Research Consortium, HERC, at Rice University as well. Esmeralda began her doctoral studies at Rice University in 2016, and she is focusing on the relationship between religion and educational equality, in particular studying what religious organizations can do to support educational equality. Following Esmeralda's presentation, I will invite Marilyn Lee and Brandon Walker to join us on stage, actually rather on screen. Marilyn Lee is the Executive Director of Loving Houston. Marilyn has extensive education, corporate, nonprofit, and ministry experience. She holds a BA from Rice University, so she's one of our Rice grads, as well as an MBA from the University of San Francisco. And she has focused on nonprofit management and development economics in order to mobilize religious organizations and churches in particular towards community development efforts. We're very, very fortunate to have Marilyn in Houston with us. I also want to invite Brandon Walker, who is president of the Summer Institute. Through this work, Brandon strives to make STEM education accessible to all learners. He has a BA from Purdue University and a master's in clinical psychology from the University of Detroit Mercy. In addition to his capacity as executive director of the Summer Institute, Brandon is also the algebra teacher for Presbyterian School of Houston. Beginning now and throughout our speakers' remarks, you be thinking about the questions that you might need answered. Please go ahead and submit your questions whenever you have them for our speakers. Just click the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. A new window should open when you do that, and you can begin typing your questions there. You should see some information right now there about how to do that. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Esmeralda. Thank you so much for being with us, Esmeralda.
Thank you, Elaine. At the end of March, the pandemic sent many schools and parents scrambling to meet the remote learning needs of the nearly 60 million students in the nation. At this point, we do not fully understand the full impact COVID-19 school closures will have on student learning, but there are 4 things that we do know about COVID-19's impact on education. Number one, as Elaine mentioned, COVID-19 is making existing educational inequalities even greater. On average, Black and Hispanic students not only tend to have fewer resources than their white counterparts, but they also tend to perform worse on average on national tests. In our very own Houston Independent School District, nearly 75% of students are considered economically disadvantaged. And overall, students perform about half a grade level below the national average. COVID-19 is exacerbating these inequalities because students show that learning loss will be greatest among Hispanic, Black, and low-income students. Hispanic students are projected to lose about 9 months worth of learning, Black students 10 months, and for all low-income students, as much as 1 year's worth of learning. Because of this learning loss, some estimates show that achievement gaps could grow about 15 to 20%. The second thing we know is that COVID-19 has revealed different levels of access to the technology required for at-home learning. Research shows that 35% of low-income families with school-age children do not have high-speed internet. That percentage is only 6% for affluent families. And when it comes to actual devices like computers and tablets, Hispanics are the most disadvantaged. For example, nearly 90% of Black and white teens have access to a home computer, but for Hispanic teens, that percentage is 80%. And even if a family has a learning device at home, it does not mean they have enough learning devices if they have more than one child in school. So a friend of mine who works in education shared that she has seen instances of affluent students working not just with 1, but 2 computer screens, while there are other instances that there are students who share a single family tablet. So these challenges could be a few reasons why many students are not currently engaging in remote learning. Research shows that while 90% of high-income students regularly log on to online instruction, only 60% of low-income students are logging on. And beyond technological support, the third thing we know is that COVID-19 has revealed that low-income and racial and ethnic minority students often lack the parent support and supervision needed to help with school assignments because of the workload that many of these families bear. So many low-income essential worker parents hold jobs that cannot be performed from home, such as working as a clerk in a supermarket or stocking supplies in a warehouse. Research from the Houston Education Research Consortium shows that in the Gulf Coast region, nearly 20% of families with children had to choose to either take off work without pay or leave their children at home by themselves. And some parents who do stay home face language barriers that make it difficult for them to help their children with their schoolwork. So in my own research here in Houston, one Spanish-speaking mother shared with me her struggles in helping her 4th grade son in math. She said, "I wish I could help my son more, but my English is not good enough to be able to teach him. It's taking a lot of work. Because I can't. I would like to explain it, but I do have a hard time because he speaks more English and I can't explain it well. I tell him, I can explain it to you in Spanish." To recap quickly, the first thing I told you is that COVID-19 is making existing educational inequalities even greater. The second was that COVID-19 has revealed different levels of access that students have to technology. The third point was that COVID-19 has revealed differences in the amount of parent support and supervision students have. And the fourth item, and the one that we want to emphasize today, is that COVID-19 has revealed the importance of having wraparound programs for local schools. Wraparound programs outside of schools, especially programs that intentionally and effectively address the challenges that we mentioned can be important partners and collaborators with our local schools. We have seen religious organizations come alongside schools to help meet some of those most pressing needs. In my own research, some Hispanic churches have stepped up to provide food distributions for local families facing food insecurity, and other churches have provided much needed school supplies to students at the start of the school year. However, there's more that religious organizations can do as a result of COVID-19. We know that many summer programs help to address summer slide, or otherwise known as summer learning loss, but now students and schools need support in addressing the COVID slide, which is the learning loss, not just from the summer, but loss compounded by being out of the classroom in the spring and some this fall. Additionally, COVID-19 has also been a socially, emotionally, and maybe even spiritually traumatic event for many students and families. Religious organizations can uniquely step in and help provide for the socio-emotional and spiritual needs that students may have. So I've just barely scratched the surface of the educational challenges exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, and briefly touched on the role that religious organizations can play in responding to these needs. So the remainder of our conversation today with our two wonderful panelists will enlighten us more on the topic and provide us ideas for actionable steps moving forward. And so I'll now give the time back to Elaine.
Thanks so much, Esmeralda, for that. That was extremely helpful. I want to now invite our panelists, Marilyn and Brandon, to go ahead and turn their video and sound on. And for Marilyn, for you to give a few remarks. Thanks so much for joining us, Marilyn. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much, Elaine. I loved my time at Rice, so this is such a blessing to be able to do this. Thank you so much for having me. So just as an introduction, Loving Houston was started 7 years ago with this idea that we wanted to help churches to love Houston. And it was actually Dr. Stephen Kleinberg who encouraged us to focus on kids. So we took his advice and we realized that if we wanted to care for kids, it makes the most sense to connect with schools. In every neighborhood, it's the schools where the kids are. And also in every neighborhood, there are churches, like a 3-to-1 ratio because we're here in Texas. So if we could connect every single school with 1 or 2 or 3 churches or faith organizations to work together to really care for the children, families, and teachers in that school, we would in essence be loving Houston. So our mission at Loving Houston is to advance community transformation by helping churches to serve local schools. And there is no way that we can advance community transformation without addressing educational inequality, whether that's inequality with resources like school facilities or school staff, or personal inequality. So Esmeralda shared that 75% of Houston ISD students are economically disadvantaged. This means that students are personally dealing with food insecurity, homelessness, family job insecurity. And if you've ever been hungry or had to worry about where you were sleeping that night, or if your parent was going to have a job next week, you know that all of that affects your ability to be healthy physically, mentally, emotionally, which in turn affects your ability to do well in school. What we've come to realize at Loving Houston is that many people just don't know that such great educational inequality exists in Houston, whether it's willful or not. Dr. Ruth Lopez Turley spoke at our end of year celebration last December, and she she showed us the data that right after racial segregation in public schools was ruled unconstitutional in 1954, private school enrollment, and particularly Christian private school enrollment, skyrocketed. So what we do at Loving Houston is we invite the people in our churches to build relationships with the children, families, and teachers in our local schools. It's not perfect, but it's a start. And it's an opportunity to bring us back together again so that we can do what Jesus called us to do, to love our neighbors as ourselves and to love as Jesus first loved us. And it's within the context of these personal relationships that we're able to see inequality with our own eyes. It's one thing to hear the statistics about hunger and homelessness. It's another thing altogether when I see that the girl that I'm mentoring is hungry, or when she's sharing with me that her mom is working during the day and studying at night to get a better job to be able to put food on the table. Also, it's through personal relationships that we can dispel stereotypes. As we get to know the students and we hear about their dreams, as we get to know the parents and we see them working so hard to provide for their children, and as we get to know the teachers who are caring for their students with increasingly limited budgets. Personal relationships are what compel us to action. So what do church school partnerships look like amidst COVID-19? They are absolutely an opportunity to address both big picture educational inequality and personal inequality. So compared to last year's numbers, literally thousands of students have not yet enrolled for school this year. And as Esmeralda said, of the students who have enrolled, only 60% of low-income students are regularly logging into online instruction. So this is increasing the achievement gap for each of these students every single day. And then to bring it out to a systemic level, this lack of attendance and lack of enrollment is affecting school funding, which is already a major concern for our local school districts. So there's this cycle of inequity that's happening. This is the first thing that faith organizations can help with right now, working with local school districts to reach out to students together. Second, there's the digital divide that Esmeralda talked about. Some school districts have provided devices and hotspots for their children, which is awesome, but not all districts have. And y'all know devices are going to break throughout the year. So faith organizations can donate devices or hotspots, or even set up their buildings with devices and hotspots for students to use. Third, teachers and school staff are really struggling right now. Teachers are being asked to teach online, which may sound simple, but it is difficult, especially with technical difficulties, as we saw today, challenging home situations. And then for the teachers who are teaching in person, there is a constant underlying fear of COVID. And there are more responsibilities because of COVID, like cleaning your students' desks in between class. That additional stress on top of the normal stresses of teaching is causing many teachers to think about retiring early or even changing careers, which will negatively affect our students who are already experiencing so much instability. So being a listening ear for teachers, like this campus chaplain or offering prayer support, are so needed right now. Some school districts also have Adopt a Teacher Facebook groups, which is a great way for individuals, families, small groups, or congregations to really care for teachers and school staff. Number 4, mentors have always been in high demand, and a consistent, caring presence in our children's lives is needed now more than ever. Mentoring has been complicated by COVID, no doubt, but some school districts have figured out an online platform, which is awesome. Others are still working on it, but we definitely encourage faith organizations to be available and ready to mentor when the systems are set up. And finally, Esmeralda mentioned this, but food and supplies. Instead of just opening your food pantry or clothes closet to whomever shows up, reach out specifically to a local school about what their students need. This is a strategic and efficient and personal way to make sure that your time and resources are going towards kids and families who really need that support. So after COVID, the same principles and partnership activities will still be relevant. What COVID has done for us is it's helped to focus us on a few things because of the limits of what we can do right now. But I would encourage all of us to keep this focus once life is back to normal, that we wouldn't go back to spreading ourselves too thin, but that we would continue to be intentional about making sure that every activity we do is relational and impactful. Thanks.
Marilyn, thank you so much for that. That's extremely helpful, very practical. Brandon, thanks so much for being with us today, and invite you to give a few remarks now.
Thanks, Elaine. I appreciate you inviting me and RPLP having me. So my name is Brandon Walker, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Executive Director for the Summer Institute. Our mission is to encourage, equip, and empower under-resourced students to become diligent scholars and faithful leaders in their communities. The reason we started this organization is that as students, the founding members actually benefited from the life-altering effect of simply having access to additional resources that might be beyond the reach of your neighborhood. Later, as luck would have it, we found ourselves as educators at a similarly well-resourced institution, and we realized that we now had access to capital and community resources that students from a different background, like us so many years ago, might not. Moreover, we were teaching in a community, a Christian school based in a church that desired to make a positive impact on the neighborhood that surrounded the church, but it wasn't sure exactly how to do so. We felt that God was calling us to do something about that. And with that, the Summer Institute 3 years ago was born. So in a practical sense, we take rising sixth graders and support them throughout their middle school career. They receive 5 weeks of additional instruction in the summer to accelerate their learning and make sure that they're both prepared for the next school year and excited about the topics they will see. Students are with us for a full day of learning, 5 days a week for 5 weeks in the summer. Our classes are small, they're long, and we're able to cover a significant depth and breadth of content in that time. We focus, like Elaine mentioned, on an immersive STEM and writing program academically, and then for extracurriculars, we focus on spiritual and physical wellness. After the summer is over, we continue to provide tutoring and instruction twice a month during the school year to make sure that the gains from the summer are not lost. We view it as our job to help fill the void that a lack of access may create. As has already been stated several times here today, that has become even more urgent during this time of dealing with COVID-19. It's not a secret that families not equipped with the resources to deal with the academic, technological, and fiscal challenges that the coronavirus bring are going to come out of this behind their peers. Although I serve as the executive director for TSI, I'm a math educator by trade. And for me, the reason why challenges like this create a disparity in the first place is best illustrated by a conversation I had with a parent of a tutoring client I had a few years ago. The father was an investment banker, and they were having issues with their school, not because the child was struggling in math, he was, but, and I'll never forget this phrasing, he said, "We don't care that there's an issue, that's fine. We just want to know that there is one so that we can put resources behind it." It took a moment for it to click that that resource he was referring to was me, but I've never forgotten that moment. That dad was doing what any parent would do for their child, giving what he had to help his child get over the hump. God bless him for it. We just also want to make sure that we're able to put resources behind those that are less fortunate as well. At TSI, we're seeing those difficulties materialize in 3 major areas: access to technology, academic programming that works, and job loss. In terms of technology, many families simply do not have either the appropriate number of devices or the appropriate internet capabilities to be able to access the learning that is happening in digital spaces. The next is academic programming. Schools that are well-resourced, especially in terms of access to technology, and have student bodies, and have smaller student bodies, and an abundance of facility space, are much better positioned to handle the challenges we are facing in education right now. Unfortunately, none of those things apply to the schools that are most vulnerable and the students that we serve. So what we're doing to address that is, one, when many schools were in what we call an asynchronous model, just meaning that instead of being face-to-face like we are right now in a digital environment, resources are put to where students can access them whenever they have the time. While many schools were doing that, we were able to pivot and actually do one-on-one tutoring with students during those Saturday sessions. We continued that model throughout the summer during our 5-week summer programming as well. We gave every student, and I'm still humbled by the ability for us to be able to have done this. We gave every student their own iPad in order for them to access their online educational resources. And we've been sending additional resources to help students supplement the learning that they're getting from their home schools. And lastly, we were able to supplement food at home by sending additional food care packages to deal with the food insecurities that have been created or exacerbated by unemployment caused by the pandemic. So what can religious organizations do? I think that the most powerful tool that we have during this time is working together. Churches and religious organizations that want to help address education inequality in their communities should reach out to organizations that are already doing the work in this space and see what kind of strategic partnership could be beneficial. You don't really have to reinvent the wheel. Luckily, TSI has been in this space and trying to address education inequality for the past little bit, so we were able to pivot when this arose, but we are not even the only organization in our neighborhoods that we target that is doing this work. And so there's a real opportunity for churches and religious organizations to establish partnerships of their own. Even if your capital resources are tight, which we know is true for many organizations right now, you'd be surprised by how much of an impact you can make with your human capital or facility space, or even providing an opportunity for members in your congregation or organization to volunteer. It allows your membership an opportunity to be on mission and to do the work that can truly be meaningful for the students and families on the other end. There's no shortage of need right now, obviously, and thankfully there's no shortage of organizations that are out there doing this good work, and those powerships can really be powerful. Just to echo that a little bit, this summer when we went to an online paradigm, one partnership that we had with our local church, St. Andrew's, allowed us to just have a space to be able to drop off and pick up resources where students could drop in and drop out. And even just that partnership, which didn't cost the church any money, was incredibly meaningful for us. So I thank Elaine for inviting me here today. I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to have this important conversation. I look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Marilyn. I know you both personally have the privilege of knowing both of you, and I know you're really working tirelessly right now. And so I'm both thankful for you being here today and also just for who you are as people and the kind of work that you're doing. So thank you for that. It looks like we have one question that's coming up in our question and answer. So our questioner wants to know about food insecurity in particular, and if food insecurity can be addressed right now through schools. The questioner says, we are partnering with a public school in my congregation. Should we ask the principal this question in particular? And if Esmeralda, if you want to jump back in as well, feel free to add your voice too if you'd like to, but I think the question is for you, Marilyn, and for you, Brandon.
So I'll say that's something that was especially important for us this summer. Every summer, students received the majority of their meals from us, and we would often see students really taking advantage of that. And so we wanted to make sure that this past summer we were able to still provide those meals because just quite frankly, students needed it. And as the summer went on, we saw more and more of our students, their parents to experience job loss over the course of that time. So a lot of schools are doing some of that. And I think that it definitely wouldn't hurt to ask to see if the school is doing it in the first place, and if they are, if the church could help to supplement that. I know our parents really appreciated the ability to do that. A lot of heartfelt messages about those food drop-offs.
Mm. And I think that, I know, Brandon, from talking to you, that food insecurity was a huge deal for parents who are involved in the Summer Institute. And so just that kind of need. Esmeralda, did you want to add anything about food insecurity and the kind of research that you've been doing for your dissertation or that you know about?
I think I would just add quickly that is obviously this is something that is a concern for a lot of families in these low-income areas. And even though some schools sometimes do provide lunches, or even during the summer times, or not everyone can get to the school. Some may have difficulties. Their parents might be working, may not have the transportation to get there or means to get there. So I think this is where religious organizations that are within those communities can kind of help fill that gap, you know, a little bit about, as what like Brandon was talking about as well. So schools can provide it, but sometimes even having schools provided does not mean that students in these communities actually can get that resource.
We have another question here, and I think this is an important question to keep in mind. The questioner says, is the forum's takeaways intended and applicable across religious traditions? That's an important thing to keep in mind. I wonder where there are interfaith opportunities. I wonder if there are interfaith opportunities to work together for children in our tremendously diverse city. That's an excellent question. I'm happy to have any of you answer that.
Real quick, can I go back to the food question?
Sure, please.
I will say that, yeah, I appreciate what Esmeralda just said, that a lot of times a school or a school district will have programs in place, but it can be hard for families to actually get there. So working specifically with that school to make sure the individuals in that school are able to access the food is really important. I will say that different school districts have different ways of doing it. So for example, in Fort Bend ISD, there's Shared Dreams. So all of the donations are given to Shared Dreams, and their Shared Dreams kind of distributes it out. Similar with Spring Branch ISD. Spring Branch ISD is very centralized. They coordinate really well all of the nonprofits and groups together to make sure that food is being distributed. Other school districts like Houston ISD or maybe Alief ISD are a little bit more decentralized. So it kind of depends on what school district you're in, what the best system is. We can help with that if you want to reach out to me, Marilyn at lovinghouston.net, to see what might be the process in your specific school district. And then in answer to your question here, Dr. Eklund, we reach out specifically to churches just because that's our population, and there are so many churches that if we could just get them all doing something, that, I mean, that's our work is cut out already. But we have had mosques and synagogues come to our workshops because these principles apply to any faith organization. And then we also actually had a pastor and a rabbi reach out to us recently because they wanted to work together. And so we're kind of helping them walk through that process of partnering with one of the high schools in the area. So yeah, absolutely. I love that idea.
Yeah, I love that too. Just to add from some of the broader research that the Religion and Public Life program is doing, of course, right now, many kids need to go to have online curriculum. Parents are not able to be home with them to supervise them. As Esmeralda said, they're essential workers. Jewish community centers across the country have really stepped up in providing spaces for kids to be safe spaces to do socially distant online education, providing computers for kids and supervision for kids during the day in a safe way. So there's some really good examples of certainly churches doing things, but synagogues and mosques and gurdwaras and organizations, especially religious traditions that meet in a place and have a building. I like really what Brandon said, that if you have a building, there are things you might be able to do with that building that are low cost and would be extremely effective in this time. This is a question for Brandon specifically. The questioner wants to know, what is your STEM? So for those of you who aren't in the know with this lingo, STEM means science, technology, engineering, and math. So science, technology, engineering, and math. What does your STEM curriculum look like? Would you be willing to share some highlights from your perspective and the student perspective? That's a very large and good question. Maybe just give us a few quick thoughts on that.
Sure, I appreciate the question. So our biggest thing is that we don't want to take a traditional approach and stand at the front of the class and tell students that this is what we're going to learn today. We take what we call an inquiry-based learning approach. It's not our phrase. This was actually training that I took part of at the Rice Office of STEM Engagement. And so we try to kind of flip the interaction a little bit. Give you a quick example. When we are going to talk about positive, negative numbers, for example, we start with a big ice cube that's in the center of the table and it's immersed in water, and we give the students salt and light and a magnifying glass. And we start with the basic question of, what do you wonder? right? And we have the students to go from there. And there's a long lesson that's really cool and I'd love to tell you about. But what we try to do is we try to engage the student's brain and get them thinking about questions that they want answered for themselves, so that we can then lean into teaching them the reasons behind it after we start to answer some of those questions. So we try to get students excited about STEM, and not just to shore up deficiencies that they might have, but to actually get them interested in STEM careers.
We have questions really starting to roll in now. Please keep them coming, people on the call. These are great questions. Really kudos to you for engaging in this way. So here's another one. What advice or encouragement would you give educators who are really struggling to facilitate educational support virtually?
So I am an educator during the day right now. This is a break that I'm taking in the middle of the day here. And the first thing is just that this is hard. And and I think to pause, on that this is difficult, especially right now for some of us that are trying to execute learning both in person and distance at the same time. There's no two ways about it that we are not able to do this in the same way that we were able to do in years prior. I think, my personal advice would be to hang in there, to continue to do the work that you're doing. We're building the boat as we're on it. And there are some best practices that really help, but there's no way of getting around the fact that what we are doing is not necessarily a replacement for what we were doing before. And that's just a reality that we have to become comfortable with.
That's excellent. That's excellent. I'll say from the point of view of a parent, I have an 11-year-old, to be kind to your teachers. Everyone feels so stretched right now. And those of us who have more resource, if we can find it deep within ourselves to be generous to our public school teachers, I think that's extremely important right now. I just want to say that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say for faith organizations also, it is such a struggle right now. And you just look on some of the Facebook platforms, there's a lot of negativity out there. And if our faith organizations can be the ones to just provide a listening ear, to acknowledge the fact that it is difficult, and to be there and to support them, I think that goes a long way as well.
Yeah. One of our religious leaders wants to know if you all have thoughts about how to deal with the issue of the separation of church and state. So I think the questioner is wondering maybe in particular about religious organizations getting involved in education, and how do we think about that? You just give your off the cuff remarks. I know you're not legal experts, and that's okay. We didn't invite you here because of your legal expertise. Yeah. Any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, when we first started, we were actually contacted by the ACLU because people were concerned about what we were doing. And I had a big, long conversation with a bunch of lawyers on the call. And what we say is that we are very intentional about doing whatever it is that a community organization would do. So asking the school how we can help and letting them lead the conversation. So if they're looking for mentors, provide mentors. If they're looking for teacher support, provide teacher support. There are going to be schools that also want you to bring in some kind of religious component. So a Bible study or like prayer support, things like that. As long as the school and the school district approve it, and there are different official approvals that need to happen, it's completely legal and totally fine. We just always, again, encourage the church or their faith organization to ask the school, ask for permission. Don't try to scoot in the back door and go under the radar or whatever, because you're going to get caught, and it's not going to be good for other religious organizations at that point either. So we're always very conscious about being above board. But yeah, if you want to come to our workshop, we have a whole section on that.
Yeah. Brandon, did you want to add anything, or Esmeralda, you add anything?
I just want to put in another plug for Marilyn Lee's workshop because it is great. I've actually been to it. And if you still have questions about how you can engage, if you want to engage with local schools, that's a great workshop to go to know kind of what are the parameters around there. And again, it's what Marilyn Lee emphasized, just being a community organization, approaching it and asking the schools what are their needs and how the churches can, or how your religious organization, whether it's a church or a different religious organization, can help meet those needs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, as a scholar of religion, I feel like I'm talking too much. I'm supposed to be moderating, but so much of our research is somehow relevant. So religious organizations have people who attend them, and something that really draws together different kinds of religious organizations is this desire to do good in the world, to live for something that's greater than our own self-interests. There are great opportunities right now for people who are religious, who are motivated to help schools to do tutoring, to do online tutoring, to just sit with kids who need extra help. Since these opportunities are online, you don't have to travel any place to do it. And so there's actually some interesting opportunities now that might not have been available otherwise. Another question, building on a lifetime of teaching and mentoring of undergraduates and graduates at different universities, this person now engages during the retirement with elementary students through iEducate and with aging adults through this Harris County Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. Over the last few months, among both children and older adults, I've witnessed, says the questioner, widening inequality of access and wrenching inequity of outcomes of education and health. I grasp that one of the principal sources of these gaps is disconnection from public institutions. What's the role of faith communities in restoring and strengthening these links? So the role of faith communities in helping perhaps school children. Marilyn talked about the number of school children who have not been able to get back to school to connect. So what would you advise faith organizations to do perhaps in connecting school children back to the schools in this time, especially if they have technology access problems? Esmeralda, why don't you say a bit from your research, which I think is maybe relevant here too, of what religious organizations in particular could do. You mentioned a couple of examples in your talk of parents feeling like they can't access resources.
I think in some of these cases, religious organizations can serve as bridges to these public institutions. So, for example, in my own research of Hispanic congregations here in Houston, pastors and because I'm doing religious organizations here, pastors and church communities are a trusted source. And so there may be some hesitation or maybe just lack of knowledge of what some of these public institutions can offer in terms of resources. But our churches, our pastors, our youth ministers can serve as bridges for parents who maybe have language barriers or have just don't have as much experience connecting to public institutions or the education system in general. So I think congregations and religious organizations can serve as bridges because they are a trusted source within their communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Marilyn, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was thinking, it just reminds me, that whole disconnection to public institutions. It reminded me of what I was mentioning about Dr. Lopez Turley's talk at our December gathering about the fact that we have in so many ways withdrawn from public institutions as people of faith, which is preventing us to see the inequality and things that are going on in our public institutions. So again, like I said, church school partnerships are a start. It's a start to see some of the inequality in a very personal way. And then as we really get to build relationships and see that inequality, that just compels us to do, like, you can't go in and build a relationship with a student or a parent and a teacher and not feel compelled to do something about it. And I feel like that's what Jesus called us to as Christians, to love our neighbors as ourselves. And I think Brandon was saying earlier, if you see that kind of inequality happening in your own family, you're going to do something about it. And so that's the same type of thing that we're talking about here is if you build a relationship with that student, you are going to do everything in your power to do something about the systems of inequality. And so I do agree with this person about the disconnection. That disconnection is causing inequality. And so, yeah, I absolutely believe that the relationships that we can build through partnerships between faith organizations and public institutions can go a long way towards making change and transformation happen.
Thank you, Marilyn. Another question. To what extent do you find that the recent racial tensions throughout the nation have helped or harmed the efforts of religious organizations and educational institutions to work against educational disparities, specifically among minority students?
So I'll say that I think that there's a little bit of resistance to, to even say that things are that there's an inequality that exists, right? To name it, because it can be seen as potentially political, especially when we deal with churches that have, a variety of different perspectives, and rightly so, in their congregations. And so that could be, a potential sticky point to prevent, an organization from getting involved in something like this. What I would just push is that we can all agree on the incredible importance of our youth receiving the absolute best education that they can. And that's regardless of background, regardless of their economic situation. And so, I think if we keep that in mind, we can push some of that, the reluctance because of the current political climate, we can push that to the side a little bit.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you, Brandon. Esmeralda and Marilyn.
The racial challenges are actually something that we've been thinking a lot about in our church school partnerships, because a lot of that is resulting in a lot of the educational inequality that's happening today. And I think there is some education that needs to happen around that. We've actually included some of that in our workshop on Thursday. Again, I don't mean to keep talking about it, but yeah, it's something that needs to be addressed and people need to be aware of, because within the context of these relationships being built, there are relationships being built across racial, political, personal, religious lines. And so being able to not just bury our heads in the sand and ignore it, but to be able to address it in a healthy, open way, we feel is really important. So it's something that we definitely think about in our church school partnerships.
Yeah, I think anecdotally what's happening in our nation and just the attention that it's had is really obviously unraveled these things that have been happening, but maybe have not been put to the forefront, and have really, at least in some religious organizations, have brought the conversation up, where maybe maybe those conversations wouldn't have happened before. Some religious organizations are now engaging in those conversations and having those tough conversations and asking those questions. What is our role? What can we do? And I think it's in our specific topic for today on educational inequalities, what COVID-19 has done is, for educators and people in education, we've known that these disparities have been there for years, for different reasons, like what Marilyn has mentioned before, but it's really put it to light and really made it public, so that some of our religious organizations that maybe didn't grapple with this before are grappling with it now and have an opportunity to really ask and see what can they engage, how can they engage in addressing some of this in their capacity. So I think in some ways it has helped, and I think obviously that's not the case for every religious organization, but I think for many it's kind of brought the conversation up and brought to light maybe some opportunities that may have been missed previously.
Thank you so much. Another question. So how can religious organizations and individuals wanting to help schools and families work with industry and businesses to assist our communities? Should we look to a more holistic approach to tap available resources, for example, reaching out to large local corporations to help with technology?
Yes, absolutely. I'm all about community, business, church, faith, organization partnerships. One thing that I love about church school partnerships in particular, or faith organization partnerships, is that within a congregation, it's not just a bunch of homogenous people, right? Like each person works for a company or an organization or as part of a network. So if you're able to bring the full arsenal is not the right word, but the fullness of your congregation and all of their networks, their families, their friends, their companies, their volunteer organizations, you're able to do so much more than if you were to just treat your organization as a set of homogenous people, just widgets that you can plug into all the same mentoring or volunteering positions, right? If you're able to bring all of that, that has the potential for huge, huge amounts of transformation. So yes, I love that idea.
Esmeralda or Brandon, did you want to add anything there?
Whether I've worked in public, private, and obviously now with the Summer Institute, I am not aware of an organization that would take something like that and say, no, I think we're okay. We wouldn't like any kind of sponsorship from a business. Absolutely, 110%. And sometimes you can even make an impact, often you can even make an impact, even if it's not, laptops or iPads that are donated, right? But just the human capital that is available in religious organizations. So, for example, if you are a chemical engineer, right, being able to speak to students that aspire to be engineers can be incredibly meaningful for those students. And so those kind of strategic partnerships are the kind of things that change lives, even if it's not, some big grand physical gesture, although we love those too, obviously.
And I will also say that a lot of the school districts are really good about engaging both. I think historically they've been really good about engaging corporate partners. Some are better at it than others. Some are already engaging faith partners and some are getting better at engaging faith partners. So check out your school district as well, because there's a good chance that your school district actually has a collaborative communities department in Fort Bend ISD, or a good neighbor, the Spring Branch ISD, they're going to kill me, but their department is really, really well done. Or in Houston ISD, the wraparound specialist. So each school district likely has a department that is doing this already, coordinating faith and corporate and business partnerships as well.
Yeah, it seems like those highly resourced schools have highly resourced PTOs, right? Because parents with means are more likely to send those children to those schools. And so what if we, who had more money, look to help the PTO or an organization that is outside our own local school, which is likely to be already wealthy? That might be something to think about. So can the speaker provide information for the Summer Institute? Are there already such institutes going on in Houston? I see that Haley is already addressing that and is putting up the websites for the organizations that we've mentioned already, and you can find out more on those websites. So Haley's putting that up again. We are also taping this event, as you know, as you agreed to when you joined, and we'll be able to provide you a tape of the event to everyone who's here in our broader list, so you can share that with folks and learn more about resources. Are there any other questions? Let me ask one of the panelists, if you could have one thing right now to address the COVID-19 educational inequality, what would it be? What would be most useful to you right now? Or what do you think would be the one thing that you would want if money were not an object? Esmeralda, do you want to start?
Wow, that's a grand question. I think in this case is, if money were not an object, it's what we talk about in terms of equity, is really providing every student what they need to succeed. And so we could do that, and whether it's all organizations, religious organizations partnering with corporate, partnering with schools to do that, I think if we could reach equity where we give students what they need, I think that's what I would say for right now in COVID-19, especially right now in this COVID-19 era.
Yeah. Marilyn, how about you?
I just go back to the fact that there are thousands of students who haven't enrolled, and the school districts and the schools just don't even know where they are. Like, if there was a way to just send bots, something out to be able to find those students, because if we don't know what's going on, if we don't have the data or the research, know what's going on, we don't know what the actual needs are. So being able to find every single one of those students, and I think that's something that churches and faith organizations can help with right now.
Brandon, how about you?
For me, it would be the ability to scale. I feel really good about this kind of wraparound educational paradigm, that we've been talking about. And so for organizations like TSI and others, there are just so many students out there that could benefit from it. So many motivated students that have the desire, that have the willingness to really dig in and make a better, existence for themselves. But it takes some resources in order to be able to do that. So just the ability to scale for both wraparound organizations like TSI and our partners in the community as well.
Thank you so much to all of you. You have just been amazing. And I think given our listeners something to really grasp and to do practically. There's a number of things that I'm personally taking away and will do differently based on what you have said. So I hope that our listeners really feel a sense of motivation, and especially those who are heads of religious organizations, that you will challenge the folks that you are responsible for. In these times, it's so tempting to care only for the needs of those in our own particular community or family. And if we can see our faith traditions as motivating us outward, I think that is never more needed than it is now. So thank you so much for being with us. Thank you to those who are listening. Thank you for your patience with our technical difficulties at the beginning and for staying on. I know you have a lot going on in your lives, and I'm sure even today you have a lot going on. And we're really honored that you've been with us. Thanks so much.